News. It's been a brutal week for Bitcoin, but my next guest believes despite recent headwinds from China, Elon Musk, and now an IRS crackdown, that Bitcoin still has new highs to hit this year. Robert Breedlove is the founder and CEO of crypto consulting firm Parallax Digital and a self-proclaimed philosopher in the Bitcoin space. Robert, good to have you with us here on Kitco.
Thanks, Michelle. Glad to be here.
Well, Robert, you got on my radar during my interview and conversations with personal finance guru Robert Kiyosaki, best known for his Rich Dad, Poor Dad series. And Robert told me that, of course, he buys gold and silver, but that he also buys crypto, and that you are his go-to guy when it comes to all matters crypto. So I wanted to give your insights to our viewers directly. And I want to start off by getting your thoughts on the volatility we've seen this week, now compounded by news that the IRS will be intensifying its attempts to tax crypto, that all cryptocurrency transfers over $10,000 will now need to be reported to the IRS, and that the Biden administration wants an extra $80 billion to boost resources at the IRS for the crypto and tax evasion crackdown. So what do you make of this news?
Yeah, I think that when an organization is suffering heavy losses or a deficit, as the U.S. government is, in addition to being cripplingly indebted, that the number one action to take is to increase your revenue. So it makes sense that Biden's administration is seeking to increase capital gains taxes. I would also expect them to be increasing property taxes at some point, real estate property. Given that it's the one asset that really cannot be concealed. And I think, too, that, the crackdown itself is just an analog institution trying to deal with a radically disruptive technology. Bitcoin itself is not a network that is going to conform to any jurisdictional law whatsoever. And that's what makes it so important, frankly. Is that it's the one monetary network we've ever had in history that does not respond to coercion or force. So try as they might, I'm sure, the U.S. government in all its wisdom will gradually adapt to the Bitcoin network, find a way to monitor and tax the transactions as best that they can. But in the long run, as we can get more deeply into, I see Bitcoin as fundamentally disruptive to gold. And government and central banking itself is an apparatus built on top of gold. So I do think that this wave of innovation is massive, and it's something that it's very difficult for us to even comprehend in our worldviews. Its long-term repercussions.
All right, well, let's focus then on the long term, provided we consider about a decade out the long term. Because you told Robert Kiyosaki about a month ago that in 10 years' time, in 2031, you see Bitcoin at $12.5 million, but with an inflation-adjusted value of around $1 million, meaning the current purchasing power of $1 million per Bitcoin. Do you maintain that outlook?
I do maintain that outlook. And this is based on percentage expansion rates of money supplies historically. So the United States expanded M2 over 30% last year. And it's easy to forget, and mankind has forgotten this repeatedly throughout history. It usually takes a few generations each time, that the expansion of the money supply is governed by a law. And it's called the law of accelerating issuance and depreciation. So the more money you print, the more money you ultimately later have to print just to keep the system going. So I do expect the expansion of US M2 to double again, probably in the next 4 years. And then I expect it to double again from there. So we'll be north of 100% US M2 expansion annually by the end of the decade. At the same time, because money has this centripetal network effect, we tend towards one. That's what gold was. That's what the US dollar is. I do expect a lot of the weaker international currencies to collapse into the dollar during this transition. So I would say that global M2 today is about $100 trillion. US M2 is about 20 trillion. So it's roughly 20% of that. I would expect US M2 to expand to be about 40% of global M2 by the end of the decade. But global M2 itself will have expanded from 100 trillion due to this law of accelerating issuance and depreciation to about 1.25 quadrillion, which is $1,250 trillion. And in that time as well, I expect Bitcoin as essentially the ultimate irrepressible non-counterparty insurance policy against central banks to appreciate in tandem. So I think its purchasing power will increase to $1 million in 2021 purchasing power. But by that time, due to the expansion in the money supply from 100 trillion US M2 to 1,250 trillion M2, Bitcoin will actually be nominally valued at $12.5 million US by the end of the decade. Further, at that point, currencies tend to start hyperinflating. So I actually think fiat currency globally will be collapsed by the mid-2030s.
All right. So certainly no disagreement, I think, in terms of the expansion of the monetary supply, the M2 out there, and certainly the inflation concerns and the debasement of fiat currencies. But what makes you so confident still that Bitcoin is going to be the solution here?
Bitcoin has introduced properties of money that are as close to perfect as the world has ever had. And so what I really challenge people that are skeptical of Bitcoin to do is to ask themselves, first of all, the question, what is money? And then secondly, why was gold selected by the free market as money? Why has gold stood the test of time for over 5,000 years? What are the properties of gold that caused it to be selected? And if you do that digging, you do that homework, you're going to end up very deep into Austrian economics at some point, which is the cumulative wisdom of humanity on economics. And it stands in counter-distinction to Keynesian economics, which I would classify more as central bank propaganda. And gold and money in general is essentially selected based on 5 properties. I've covered this a lot in my work. They are divisibility, durability, recognizability, portability, scarcity. I won't expound upon them here, but feel free to dig some into Austrian economics or check out my work to see why. And essentially across those 5 properties of money, Bitcoin has perfected them in a way that the world's never seen before.
Well, Robert, the question is whether you can still make the case for Bitcoin as a store of value with the extreme volatility that we've seen just this past week, with one person having such an impact on the market, one tweet from Elon Musk sending crypto markets down or up by double-digit percentages. Can we really say that an asset or a currency with so much volatility is a store of value? Because that's been one of the concerns raised this week with the crazy volatility we've seen.
Yeah, I would say a couple of things about that. Firstly, volatility is a natural function of price discovery, and it tends to contract as market cap expands. So that's inversely proportionate to market cap. We've seen that pattern play out with Bitcoin, that its volatility is actually contracting. And secondly, as a store of value, it really comes down to how you define a store of value. So Bitcoin is an asset that's monetizing in real time. Call it $1 trillion market cap at 60,000 per Bitcoin. It's more like 700 today. It's competing for a $250 trillion marketplace, which is global store of value. So it's very nascent relative to its total addressable market. But what's unique about Bitcoin in terms of sort of a secondary definition to a store of value is how much of the total supply can I own? What are the assurances that I'm provided of owning a guaranteed fraction of the total supply? And historically, gold was the technology which best satisfied this store of value property. You knew with utmost certainty that whatever portion of the gold supply you held, you couldn't be diluted by more than roughly 2% per year. Bitcoin offers us something radically new. It's a money premised on perfect information. If I hold 1 million Bitcoin, I have 1 million of 21 million possible forever. No one can ever change that again. So it's perfect inelasticity of supply, and that is the property that market actors seek in a store of value. So Bitcoin has perfected the store value function of money.
So going off your reference to gold, and gold has proven that it is a store of value over thousands and thousands of years. It has stood the test of time. But gold has also been used as a payment method, as a currency, from gold coins to gold bars. Transactions have been made for goods with gold. So does it matter if Bitcoin never takes off as a currency, as an actual form of payment? I mean, Elon Musk saying he no longer accepts Bitcoins for Tesla payments, and governments from Turkey to China saying it can't be used for transactions. So how does that impact the long-term viability of Bitcoin if it never really becomes a currency?
Well, the evolutionary path that gold followed was that it was initially a collectible, really adored for its beauty, and people could adorn themselves with it. Eventually, it became a store of value, and that as societies began to trade, this became one of the most liquid assets because it satisfied monetary properties. It was only later then that when it started being used and traded widely, that it became a medium of exchange. It became a denominator of prices. And then finally, it becomes a unit of account. So people actually start to think in the money that they're trading with most widely. Bitcoin's following a similar path of monetization. And today, I would just say that we're early in that store value phase. So ultimately, no one needs to jump the gun. We don't need to start using it as a medium of exchange immediately. The incentives for Bitcoin, it's an accumulation game or a land grab. You want to take as much territory on this absolutely scarce monetary network as you can and hold it until a certain market capitalization is reached that has incentivized you to go and want to spend it. So that's the path it's following. It doesn't matter if Elon wants to accept Bitcoin for Tesla or not. That has no impact on Bitcoin's success.